and how we got here. But I want to talk a little bit about how we got here in terms of our regulatory authority and our regulatory structure in New Orleans. Some of you may have heard me say before that New Orleans is really special. A lot of you know that New Orleans is special, but there's yet another way in which we're special. We're one of only two cities in the whole country that has local regulatory authority over our investor-owned utilities. Now that's different from having a municipal utility. There are, I think, 11 cities in Louisiana that have a municipal utility, something like Lafayette or Alexandria. But New Orleans never had a municipal utility. NOPC was New Orleans Public Service, Inc., which is incorporated. It was a for-profit company that actually started as a GE offshoot way back in the day. And NOPC was created as an organization, as an umbrella organization to bring together a number of for-profit entities that were serving electric power throughout the city of New Orleans and managing our transportation system. That, of course, included the streetcars. But back in the 80s, there was a bit of a dust-up. A number of things happened. First, there was a somewhat shady move of NOPC, or regulatory authority of NOPC, from the city of New Orleans over to the Louisiana Public Service Commission. The LPSC is that regulator that manages the rest of the state. And they regulated in a very similar fashion to the way utilities are regulated throughout the country. Louisiana has a couple of interesting distinctions, however. Rather than it being an appointed position, they are elected officials. There are 5 of them at the state level. And they are allowed to accept campaign contributions from the utilities they regulate. Here in New Orleans, our regulators, also elected, have taken on a number of voluntary promises. Sitting council members have made these voluntary promises not to accept campaign contributions, not only from the utilities they regulate, so officially they're not allowed to do so, and then also officially those who volunteer to say we're not going to do this also do not accept campaign contributions from the advisors who make recommendations on how they're supposed to regulate. So, as you may know, there's an awful lot of quiet money. In some circles they call it dark money, where money is moved around whether it's officially from the utility or officially from an advisor or not. There's plenty of money in politics here in New Orleans and across Louisiana. But back in the 80s and 90s, when there was that shakeup about who would be watching after Entergy New Orleans, who had the authority and had the say, there were also, when we got that authority back after the Get NOPC Back campaign, a number of advisors, both legal and technical, and when I say technical I mean engineers and economists and so forth, sort of grew up out of a number of needs for the city council to do that regulation. Typically, in most states, regulation of utilities is a full-time job. Louisiana is sort of unusual in this way as well. The Public Service Commission is similar to our legislature, not considered a full-time job as a regulator. It's true in New Orleans. City council members certainly have a full-time job ahead of them, but regulation is just a small part of that. And so this is why they started looking for outside support, outside consultants to support their regulatory work. At the same time, an inside body called the Council Utility Regulatory Office was created to do some of that same regulatory support. Unfortunately, starting back in the 80s and 90s, nearly all of, something like 98% of that regulatory work got shipped out, farmed out to outside consultants that are collectively considered the advisors. And those advisors now make between $6 and $7 million collectively. Most of those advisors are not from New Orleans. The 2 lead advisory teams are out of Washington, D.C. and out of Denver, Colorado. That's the legal in Washington. It's the Dentons. They're the world's largest law firm by count of attorneys and offices. And the Dentons, or rather, and Legend, which is out of Denver, which is a fairly small technical support team that from our research doesn't appear to be involved in many regulatory bodies anywhere else in the country. And so you've got this enormous law firm that also does a lot of lobbying internationally, has a lot of oil and gas and utility companies as their clients, doing the legal work for the city council, and then you've got this small technical shop out of Denver. And then underneath of that, there are a very small handful of local consultants that do some of the economic work, some of the legal advisory support staff. But that's very, very small in sort of, comparison to the rest of the budget. The Alliance has been advocating for an awfully long time, going back to the 90s at least, that those large dollars shouldn't be shipped out of New Orleans, but instead should be going to the Council Utility Regulatory Office to build the local bench of expertise and knowledge, and certainly that people here on the ground, who for the most part are paying the electricity bills, certainly have more of a say and are more engaged in the day-to-day. The City Council has resisted that, and most recently pretty loudly resisted it in 2016, and said, no, we want to keep these same consultants, and these same consultants have really raised some eyebrows in the last couple of years, especially around this gas plant that we all know about. Thank you. As you know, the City Council has approved and reapproved a new natural gas-fired power plant. And part of the appeal, which is a lawsuit that the Alliance, Sierra Club, New Orleans 350, and, oh darn, one more.
Justice and the
No, not the appeal. Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. There's a lawsuit that is appealing the way in which the City Council and more directly the advisors made the decision to approve that gas plant. And part of our argument has been that it was the advisors making decisions outside of the council, outside of the advisors' mandate and jurisdiction, that got us down this road and locked into this gas plant that nobody wants and nobody needs. And so we've been really interested in pushing this council to wind down those contracts and really start bringing, A, that money home, B, reducing those costs entirely. We don't need to be spending that amount of money to do this regulation. And C, really build the knowledge base and the wealth of knowledge here in New Orleans so that people have more of a say, rather than expensive attorneys who cost $600 an hour, and economists out of Denver who do the same. So I'm going to pass it to this gentleman right here, and look forward to questions.
5 minutes instead of 3.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what I know about utility regulation comes from Logan, so a lot of the reporting you see coming out of the lens wouldn't happen without her, so just want to start off by thanking her for that. Yeah, I mean, just to fill in some of the gaps here, I mean, yeah, like she said, really unique regulatory structure. When I talk to utility experts from around the country, you know, outside of here, it's just a very well-known thing in that circle. I mean, the utility field is kind of a very insular community where everyone seems to know everything. But yeah, I mean, New Orleans is kind of put up as this example of a very strange way to do things. Other regulatory bodies you see, I mean, it's over 100 employees, right? And for a decade, Curro had 0 employees, and right now we're up to 5, but still, you know, really different from most of the country. Another way that we're really unique, and I think is an important part of this, is the contract structure for our utility consultants. So it's normal, most utility regulators will hire consultants for certain things, especially, you know, litigation at the federal level, for example. But I mean, that would be 10%, 15, 20% of the budget, unlike ours where it's like 95% of our budget. But when consultants are hired, they're hired to do a specific task. So we need you to represent us in X case, or we need you to negotiate X contract. Our contracts are a general consultant contract. There's no specific task that we ask our consultants to do. So that means every year, it almost feels as if the consultants are able to fill up, they're able to fill up to a certain amount. That's basically what the contract says. You can consult us and you can bill up to X amount. And so it kind of feels like they almost fill that space with whatever they choose, they're going to spend their time on. A different way to structure this, and I think if you actually want to see a new regulatory structure, I think the contract is the key to that. So, if the city wants to have a consultant, you need to tell the public exactly what that's for, which I don't think we have right now. A good example is the Smart and Sustainable Cities Committee. That is basically that's our legal consultant. That's their brainchild. And they basically do all the work for that committee, but that was never, there was never any public bid for that. They just kind of took over that work, and the reason they were able to do that is because of the vague nature of their contract. So again, when we're talking about change, the contract is a really key thing. Another thing just in the history that I think is worth noting, there used to be two governing bodies in charge of utility regulation. There was KIRO, which is run by the council, and then the utilities department, which was run through the mayor's office. And that actually was reestablished last year, right? But actually it was disbanded in 2001. Yeah, under Ray Nagin, and actually the city attorney who went and argued in front of the city council saying that they could dissolve the utilities department was Charles Rice Jr., who obviously he had just been working at Entergy for 2 years, quit his job, became the city attorney, disbanded the utilities department, and then, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, became the CEO of Entergy. So I think that's an important part of this as well. And then I also just wanted to comment on a broader government theme that I think, the story of this utility regulation really exemplifies. And I think you find it especially where conservative, small government politics are dominant. And what you see is that in an attempt to keep government spending down, there's this attempt to reduce the amount of city employees, right? We don't want 100 people running utility regulation. That's just too much. That's too much salary. But what happens is that you still need to deliver those services. And as time goes on, the amount of services that people expect government to deliver grows. And instead of adding city employees, what will happen is that they add consultant contracts. So now, instead of just paying a reasonable salary to a city employee, now you're paying for a $5 million CEO salary. You're paying for stock dividends every year, right? So in an attempt to keep government small, you often increase, government spending by spending your money directly on these privatized services that you don't actually need to have in-house employees. So just wanted to bring that broader theme up. And yeah, also excited to answer questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Happy Johnson to the stage, please. Thank you, sir.
Team Happy in the house. What's up?
Hello, friends.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Y'all awake or is it, eating the food, the beans? 5 minutes. Well, my name is Happy Johnson. I am a proud resident of the Lower Ninth Ward, a public advocate and children's author. I've been working to help rebuild New Orleans for 13 years. I served as one of the youngest African Americans to drive an emergency response vehicle after Hurricane Katrina. I was the only black male on my unit. That experience moved me to work to help diversify the disaster management and environmental resilience industry. And so for the last 13 years, I have been working to inspire the next generation of future first responders and wetland scientists. And so the series of books that I write seek to excite the imagination of young people to get them interested in that field. About 2 years ago, I was really fortunate to join this coalition with Mark and Logan and Grace and Sophie and Pat to really try to I would say maybe like change the mission of Entergy, which should be focused on the consumer, which should be focused on people, which should be focused on lowering rates and ushering in a new era of renewable energy. And this was not part of my direct portfolio. I focused mostly on water and the built environment and coastal restoration issues. Of course, energy efficiency is connected to all of those things. We know about carbon sequestration and the impact that ushering, using LED light bulbs and five-star appliances. We understand all the impact that that has on the sustainability of our wetlands. But about 2.5 years ago, I attended a meeting in New Orleans East that Entergy hosted, and it was about the gas plant. And I wasn't a part of the coalition because I'm just a public advocate. I'm a resident, just like many of you, and it's mostly organizations. But I went to just learn as much as I could and to get an objective understanding of the issue. And as more time went on, I really got an education about what was taking place. And so now I feel like I'm fluent in utility. Right? And so what I can tell you, as a member of a great coalition of diverse people who have been fighting against this gas plant and fighting really just to save New Orleans and to save our culture and to save the city for the kids that will be coming up behind us. I've learned so much that the structure of our advisory system and the structure of the utility committee is really about money. It's really about profits. These guys are really smart. They know what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time. And they've got a pretty, if I was going to write like a crime movie, this would be like a script I would write. They got it pretty good. They've got it on, Humphrey Bogart, they got it on all ends. They really have insulated themselves from civic participation, public input, whatever you want to call it. I've really learned how to write a heist here. These guys have really got it going. But just to get on a serious note, just some of the things that our experts have said earlier. One thing I will point out is that Mayor Cantrell last year issued an executive order to reestablish the mayor's office of utilities. And that is a direct result of the coalition and people who have been fighting. We didn't get any fanfare from it, but I know firsthand that without the sweat and blood of this coalition, that she would not have signed that executive order. And so that's a reflection of the hard work. That's a win for us. The gentleman that's in that office, his name is Jonathan Rhodes. He's an attorney. I got 1 minute. He's focused on franchise agreements and is going to kind of buffer the council's utility regulatory office. But if I could just say something about the advisors, they are so insulated because they have a system, a circular system, where they have contributed their earnings to council members, and it's really insulated themselves. And so we really need to bust it up. We need diversity. There aren't many African American males who are these high-paid advisors. So we need local knowledge. $7 million a year should be kept in the city of New Orleans. There's no reason, given our wage and poverty structure, that we would be outsourcing that kind of money with no bids and no local firm. It's completely just outrageous. And so we've got a long journey ahead of us to make the system a little bit more fair so that we can kind of create an education pipeline for our kids and high school students to really, New Orleans should be the hub of energy efficiency. There's no reason we should be spending the money in Denver and DC. It makes no sense.
Thank you so much. This is the bucket we have in the front, and we have another one in the back if you have any questions.
You write out a postcard, or is that card?
It's one to right here being passed around, and there's one on the back by the food table. And please, everyone, we provide the delicious red beans every week. They cost. It isn't free, so please leave us something to help us prepare for the next meal for next week. Please. Yes, ma'am. On your card.
On your card.
Oh, I don't have no phone. Oh, coming right out of all of our pockets. Anybody who pays an electricity or gas bill in the city of New Orleans is paying for that $7 million. And so that isn't coming out of the city's budget, that isn't coming out of property taxes, that isn't coming out of Entergy's money, that's coming directly from our pockets. And that's an awful lot of money, and far more money than is for regulatory costs in most jurisdictions.
Anyone else?
And then if you think about the reason why we're so passionate about, why we're here tonight, why we do the work that we do, imagine $7 million to subcontractors that advise a city council committee where the public has no direct contact. So I have made multiple requests to the utility committee chair for the advisors to host a number of public meetings, and my request was turned down. The advisors are not allowed to directly hold community meetings. So imagine that. We pay them $7 million, we can't talk directly to them. So that makes no sense. So that's part of one of the asks that we're making to Helene Moreno is to make the advisors more public friendly, to make it easier for us to engage and communicate with them, and to really just kind of open up the closed door dealings. I mean, let the public know who these people are, what their level of expertise is, and who they're donating their money to on the city council. So.
And just to add on to that, 2 points. Well, I forgot my first one. Anyway, the second one is that in terms of to that question of what ratepayers are paying, one thing, and this isn't directly, well, it is tied to the advisors, everything utility related is, but you often hear from the advisors that one of the reasons why this money is worth it is because they've been able to achieve one of the lowest rates in the country here in New Orleans. What they're usually referring to is the actual per kilowatt hour rate. That doesn't include like the fixed rates you see, these riders that you see on your bill that don't change from month to month, but they're there. They add up. And every year I've lived here, I see another one. So there's that, and a great study came out last year that looked at energy burdens throughout the country. So not just what your bill is, but what your bill is compared to your income. And so it was us and Memphis that had the highest energy burdens in the country. And it's becoming a really important topic when we talk about affordable housing and affordable living. Energy costs as a proportion of income is rising even faster than rents are rising in proportion to incomes. There are some places, like again, they use Memphis as an example a lot, but you can find people that are paying 25% of their salaries in their energy bills. I'm sure you can find people here that are the same. So that's an important thing when you hear the advisors kind of brag about this really low rate. I think they just keep in mind.
Oh, thank you. The next one is, why can't New Orleans set up its own electric and gas company?
New Orleans could set up its own electric and gas and water. So there are lots of cities in the country that have a municipal utility service. And that service provides everything from electricity, gas, water, sewer, drainage, trash, sanitation. It would be entirely possible to what is called municipalize. That is not something, however, I can say that happens very quickly. There are a number of cities throughout the country that are attempting municipalization right now, and I think it's Boulder, Colorado, has been working on municipalization for about 6 or 7 years, and it's been around and around and around. The people want it, but it is a political hot potato, as you might imagine, and because there's an awful lot of money in utilities. Now, I will note this. Last year, Entergy New Orleans' pure profit was $44 million. That's just pure profit. Wow. That's not revenues, which were in the many, many, many millions and into the billions, but pure profit was $44 million. So let's think about if $44 million instead was going to the city of New Orleans. right? I mean, just think about, I'm not even saying we need the 44 million. I'm saying if the city of New Orleans decided to be a municipal utility and think comprehensively about our energy and our water, which by the way are inextricably linked, and everybody's trying to pretend they're not, we might get some real efficiencies in all of the costs across the board. But I will say again that this is not something that we can do overnight, and it would be a pretty tremendous lift for all of us to work together to get that.
And something to add on to that, actually the advisors, something that we didn't mention, I wrote a lens piece that it was way too long, to be honest with you, but basically it went back to 1985. We've had the same primary advisors for over 30 years. I mean, it's the same people. And basically the story was about how political connections and contributions helped keep them there. But I bring that up only because when they were first hired to look at our system, they actually recommended that we municipalize NOPSI. And then actually in 2005, or 2006, they advised against it. So I'm not really sure what the reasoning or why it changed there. But as to it taking a long time, I think another important note, and something really important if you're talking about any change to the utility regulation here, is the fact that the Public Service Commission is made up of people who are already familiar with the utility industry. They come in with the knowledge. People aren't usually elected to city council, based off their utility bona fides. And a lot of times the utility chair comes in with maybe no utility experience or knowledge at all. So where New Orleans has a real challenge is when the baton is passed and making sure that these people know, what the public has already been fighting to change, right? Getting them up to speed. And unfortunately, I think that falls to the public to do. But I think, in any long-term change in utility regulation, which, any of these changes take a long time, it seems to me. But yeah, that's an important thing. Watching who takes the reins of the utility chair and making sure they know what's been happening, what the public has been fighting for before they actually got there.
I do want to say one thing about a point that he made about public service commissioners or commissioners in other jurisdictions having some knowledge and background in this work. I got to tell you that isn't true at the Louisiana Public Service Commission, where there's an orthopedic surgeon serving as a public service serving as a public service commissioner who really only does commission work 1 day a week. And so, and that's largely because in Louisiana, regulation, because of all the money that is involved, winds up being a stepping stone for higher office. There are more than one prior public service commissioners who've gone on to become governor, and so it is very much considered that kind of stepping stone. So while it is certainly true that I don't know anybody who runs for New Orleans City Council to regulate Entergy, it is very rare for that to be the same at the state level, which is, I find actually quite unfortunate, because this work is a full-time job, and which is why, for example, in Washington, D.C., the other city that has that local regulatory authority, remember I said there were two cities, Washington, D.C. is the other one. In Washington, D.C., they have their regulatory authority in a public service commission. It's 3 people who are appointed on rolling bases by the mayor, and they have a full staff of at least 70 that include all of the attorneys and the long-standing technical staff that they need. And so one of the things that New Orleans could do, if we really wanted, if we decided not to go in the municipalization route, but we decided to really deeply make reforms to our regulatory system, would be to create an internal public service commission that would have that as a full-time job. It's just an option.
And just another way for us to, yeah, for sure. Another way to address it is, well, I think, Entergy, this is why public or independent people running for office is so important, because the advisors have funded all of our major political organizations in the city of New Orleans. So what happened during our council journey here is that when it came time to be would think that we need people, we need a lot of people, not just one person. We need a bunch of people who are independent but committed to social justice to run for office and get on the city council. And it's not about taking Energy down or the advisors down. Quite frankly, it's about asking the right questions and protecting the people in the city. I mean, that's common sense. You had a city council vote unanimous to approve this gas plant, which is a 30-year tax, where you have 52% of black males in this city unemployed. You have 50% of black children living in this city that live in poverty, right? Half the black people in this city live in poverty. And you unanimously, with no case studies, with no best practice, unanimously passed a 30-year tax to build a gas plant in New Orleans East, in one of the most underserved and underinvested areas in the city. We can't stand for that. We have to do much better than that. So we really need more people to get involved in this fight to hold our city council accountable.
One quick question for Happy. So when will you run?
Well, like I said, it's not just about one person. We really need a bunch of people, because when we look at the history of the council, let's just say in the last couple of years we've had Susan Guidry, and then maybe before that Shelley Madura would have been the lights on the council. And then they have always been kind of boxed in by the other people who have received an enormous amount of contributions from the advisors and Entergy. So the truth is, what we've learned from just studying the council dynamics, it really can't just be one person kind of leading the charge. And so we saw that really on display a couple of weeks ago when they considered a revote. Christian Palmer was starting to really ask some critical questions about transparency and the money and how it's going to be spent, the receipts, why it's not made public, and a number of people who are in the pockets of Energy on the council told her to be quiet. So my thing is, when I see people who are willing to fight for us, we have to acknowledge that and support them and thank them for doing that, because it has been too much behind closed doors dealings going on for like far too long. So,
Thank you, Happy. This next question is, what would it take to change the system so that PSC cannot accept donations from who they regulate?
That would, in Louisiana, that would likely have to be a decision of the Public Service Commission. I suppose there could be legislation. So, for example, in Mississippi, there is a rule that bars that kind of campaign finance. But in Louisiana, there are ethics rules. So, for example, the Public Service Commission has adopted various ethics rules about whether they'll allow a utility to throw them a fundraiser a certain number of days outside of a vote. But those are ethics rules that are adopted from within the organization. I think if there's enough political pressure, I think we could get that rolling, but we need a lot of political pressure to get that. I think here in New Orleans, it wouldn't take quite the lift to do, because there is already that history of, I think it's 3 times in a row now, that the council has voted on those voluntary resolutions. But to make an ordinance that doesn't just say, you're a sitting council member, so you're not going to take money, but your challenger can, which is the situation we're in right now, I think it would take an ordinance to do that. And so, again, that's something that public pressure could certainly rise up.
Thank you. The next question is, anyone, please explain Helena Moreno's plea, and do you support it?
Yeah. I think I can speak to that.
Thank you.
So Lynn Moreno, I've written about this a bit. She's talked about trying to reduce our reliance on consultants and build up the Curo office. I mean, she's added 2 employees. Her plan right now, she's had the director of the Curo office is writing up a proposal that we expect to become public next month about, what can this office look like, a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And I think think this goes to what Logan was talking about, which it's a slow process. I mean, it's something that New Orleans has literally never had before. So they're in the process of kind of looking at this and trying to map out what that will look like. And in an interview with her, I kind of asked, how do we keep you accountable to this? You're not passing any ordinance that says that this is going to change. This is just kind of at your discretion at this point. And there wasn't a great answer to that besides the fact that she said, listen, I've publicly come out and said that I want to change the nature of utility regulation. And people now know that. And if I don't, people will know that in the future. So I think basically what she's saying is that I intend to change utility regulation here, but if she's going to be kept accountable, it's going to come down to people watching. And unfortunately, with utility stuff, it is complicated, it is often dull, and it's not, someone goes back on a promise on a utility measure, something as boring as a utility regulatory contracting, setup, it's not headline grabbing. So it will be incumbent on groups like this who do stay engaged in kind of the nuanced topics like this to really keep her accountable. But yeah, I mean, she has at least publicly said that she would like to make this change, and now it's just a matter of watching, what happens. But the next step in this will be May. We'll see what the Q office comes up with. They'll be suggesting, how many employees to add and whatnot, and the lens will definitely cover that. So stay tuned for that.
If you go back and look at the, and I know y'all will do this because it's boring, but I don't know, I like C-SPAN, but if y'all go back and look at the March 8, 2018 council vote to approve the gas plant, what you will see is a city council hell-bent on approving a gas plant without asking the right types of questions, without protecting the ratepayer and the citizens of the city. If you go and look at, that was just a year ago, now if you go and look at March, was it April? When did they redo it? Maybe?
February 21st.
February. So then if you go look at the tape in February of 2019, and you compare and contrast those two tapes, you begin to see the genesis of a caterpillar slowly crawling out of its cocoon. Yeah. You see new leadership and a new chairwoman asking more questions than before, but the process still very tainted and still not the ship has not been righted. But you see a different tone, and so I think that our chairwoman is moving in the right direction. It'll be a matter of how fast can she get it done, and what's the difference between what she may say publicly and what actually happens. Because what we see is that this city council is very smart in terms of media optics. They have been able to get a message out to the public saying that they are going to re-examine and review the application for this plant, and then they actually did nothing. And so I had a number of people sending me messages saying, "Great, y'all did a great job. We can't believe it. We heard that 2 members on the council were going to review the decision." But they didn't do it. And so sometimes the media will print and put on TV that they're going to do something before they actually do it. And that puts us in a really difficult kind of organizing position, because then we have some people say, "Well, we thought they had changed their mind. You guys did good. Why y'all still fighting for this? Go get some crawfish." No, that was a press release. That was not a policy change. That was a press release. So we have to watch what our new chairperson does to hold the feet to the fire, and we got to change the contract structure.
Yes,
So that's going to be in the Curo office. All of it should be in-house, and it's a great thing that the mayor signed this executive order. So all of our blood, sweat, and tears has not been for naught. We have seen tremendous progress, some tremendous advancement, but it's still in the caterpillar cocoon phase. We haven't seen the full fruition of the work that we got. It's like a long way to go.
Piggyback, just one small thing in terms of starting to see a change of how these conversations go. For years, and just to kind of exemplify how in charge of everything these advisors are, the advisors have been writing, when Jason Williams was chair, they would write him scripts for every episode, for every, stuff. So, that, in that sense, the advisors were 100% in control of the conversation. Councilmember Moreno is now getting away from that and actually, talking about this stuff herself. And I think the biggest change in that is that when she starts talking about this and she doesn't understand something, she'll ask these questions publicly, which I think is useful. But yeah, again, just starting to see the beginnings of a new thing. So yeah, we'll just have to track that.
And another, one more good symptom of the growing. Traditionally, when the city council decides to make some sort of a new policy, there is what's called a rulemaking, where people get to say, here's what I think it should be, here's how, from my perspective, whatever it is that you're advocating for. But traditionally, it starts with a draft, so a version that is almost fully that comes from the advisors, that then everybody kind of gets to what I call nibble around the edges on, and just make little nudges of changes. But as a result of Justice and Beyond and Vela and a whole bunch of us in this room and many others, the City Council started a rulemaking for a renewable portfolio standard here in New Orleans. And for the first time, that rulemaking didn't start with a half-baked or nearly baked version. It started with a series of questions, which is how really thoughtful rulemaking happens. Because it's not just starting with, well, here's something we're probably going to get, and maybe you can tweak a few things. We're actually getting to make that input and put our position forward first. So that's another little one. And those are the things that they're not obvious, but they're things that we have to say, hey, this is a good thing that you're doing, and call it out. Because I have a tendency to assume that if specific wins aren't sort of underlined and specific sort of steps forward aren't said, hey, well done, this is how we want it in the future, we could backslide. So I just want to suggest we continue to push in that direction.
Thank you so much. One more time, everyone. We halfway hour mark for the red beans. So if you can please, whatever you have, can you please contribute and help us to prepare for next week's meal? Thank you. The next one is, instead of spending $7 million locally, can we lessen the cost?
Absolutely. It won't cost $7 million. It shouldn't cost half of that.
Yeah. $600 an hour. And then just one thing I wanted to say earlier, why the restructuring advisors are so important. Logan mentioned that Entergy New Orleans profit for the year was 44 million.
Pure profit.
Pure profit. Quarterly, Entergy Corporation, though, they net 400 million quarterly. So, and we also see in the profit margin that the advisors were able to get their council to set up for the gas plant at 11%, where the national average is more like 8 or 9%. And so they were able to really kind of tweak the language, thinking that nobody really cared about a little measly 2%, but in the long run, those millions add up. So we really just need to get, it's because we need to be clear, it's not just about getting locals on as advisors or consultants. You've got to get the right people with the right mindset in there to change the system, because it's really a cash cow, and there's a lot of money, and there's a lot of power in the utility committee. It wields significant influence, and so we've got to get the right folks in and change it from really kind of exploiting people in the city to make money to really delivering reliable and, energy, renewable energy, and helping New Orleans be a city of the future. I mean, when you look at the 10 things that are really bad about New Orleans in terms of poverty, and then you look at the 10 things that we're good at, the thing that's not on the list is infrastructure or, reliable delivery of goods, quality of life, roads, So we're making a lot of progress, but we need to stick to the fight. And just to emphasize something that was just said earlier, where we are right now is far better than where we were before, because we have people that on the council that are willing to listen. But the only way we're going to see real change is if we keep up that same intensity of pressure over a long period of time. And so we can't just wane, we can't just say, oh, because the cameras are there for the gas plant that we stop doing what we're doing. We still have to go every month to every utility meeting, and if we can't make it to the utility meeting, we need to send them emails letting them know that we're watching. A lot of times I'm watching, you know. So we gotta let them know that people care, because the only reason they changed their attitude was because of public outcry and because of local and national press. And I mean, you know, so the media has also just been great in uncovering a lot of the corruption and closed door deals. And so if we're on a roller coaster, I would say we're at the bottom, but we're going up. And so we gotta, I'm waiting for that. Woo! Yeah. when we, you know, maybe have more than one utility company, when we have much lower rates, when we have a strong mayor's office that has a utility staff, a bureau staff, and then we have council people that don't take money from Entergy, because what we've seen on the council now, at least 4 of the members, and I guess it's all right, but I mean, they've taken money from them in the past, but what the problem with that is it influences the way they handle and negotiate the situation at hand, and we don't get the transparency and accountability that we need. So we had one member take money for a parade, you know, while she was sitting on the council. And so, you know, it's like, I mean, it's just kind of like, you could have waited until the negotiations were over, I mean, to show us your hand or to show us that, you know, because the big disgrace was just about questions and asking the right questions, and we can't have officials who are afraid to challenge them. And this was too much is on the line, you know, for our relationship with climate change and the amount of sea level rise that we face, and the abysmal our pumping system and the status of sewage and water board. There's too much on the line not to ask the tough questions of our only utility provider that nets $44 million a year, the highest profit margin in the country, and that has had the same advisors for 30 years. There's too much on the line for the people of the city, especially rebuilding after Katrina. So shame on our officials if they don't do their job right now. We have been through too much. We've seen too much shit.
Yes.
We've seen too much shit.
Yes,
To let them ignore the hard work that the people of the city have done, to ignore that, and to let this corporation continue to exploit and make profits on the backs of poor people in the city. Shame on them if they don't do their job. And we need to put them out of office if they continue to ignore the will and the voice of the people. You know?
I wanted to ask a question. Seems that since we have come to this standstill in the city against Entergy, and we do know they are tied in with several other Fortune 500 companies, speaking like the Formosa plant that's coming in St. James, do you think we should all band in with the people of St. James and all those parishes carrying it to the state now, since city is like at a dead set? So as a people, I feel that's what we should do. That's my opinion.
I definitely think we should be standing and working with the people of St. James, no question about it. I would not say we're at a dead set. I think right now, just considering the decisions that are to be made about Entergy New Orleans in particular in the next 5 months, we're not at a dead set at this moment. We've got lots of work to be doing on the rate case, which will decide how much we're paying on our electricity bills for the next number of years, on whether we actually move forward with real renewables and real energy efficiency and resilience in our city, which is what our energy system needs to be, is resilient. And those are decisions that will be made in the next 5 to 6 months. So if it's possible, if we can yes and it, I'm gonna yes it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to all work together. I mean, there's so much lesson that can be learned. And the real challenge that we're at is, I feel like our elected officials are trying to figure out, well, if you look at the Constitution of Louisiana, I'm hoping somebody knows it better, the wording better than me, but basically it says that the state Constitution of Louisiana says that we're supposed to find a balance between, what is it, like the saving the earth and exporting oil and gas. It's something, what's the language?
It's the mandate related to how the Department of Environmental Quality makes decisions, is that they don't make decisions purely on environmental basis. They make decisions based on an economic and environmental basis, meaning they are not the Department of Environmental Quality.
The Department of like capitalism, so I don't know
Yes.
what to call
Yes,
it,
yes.
but our Constitution is written where where it affects everybody in the whole state, no matter what parish you live in. And where we are now is trying to figure out how to coexist with the luxury of oil and gas and our need to make major reforms given our relationship to climate change. That's where we see our officials struggling, not really struggling, but we see them thinking about how to keep doing what they want to do.
Yes.
But for the rest of us, we see it as a struggle. It's a struggle with understanding the real effects of climate change and the real our dependence on oil and gas. So our dependence on oil and gas and our need to usher in, kind of just renewable revolution so that we can sustain our culture and our people and our assets. And so by partnering with St. James, we will only be stronger. Because just doing one thing differently here in Orleans or in St. James won't have the effect that we need to combat sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. We need to have a whole sea shift in many ways in the way we do business. And so that's why I'm really glad to see Orleans Parish join kind of like the Greater New Orleans civil lawsuit against oil and gas companies for these canals and need to backfilling. The previous mayoral administration did not join that lawsuit, but Cantrell has, and so I'm glad to see us, putting our foot in this federal fight to hold oil and gas accountable and make them pay to restore the coast, because the water is coming. I mean, I don't know if y'all know. I mean, y'all do know that. I mean, it's already here.
Yeah.
So it's not if the levee breaks. It's like when the levee breaks. When we flood again.
Thank you. Everyone, we have like 10 more minutes before we'll be moving to whether we go from here. So I'm gonna ask at least 2 more questions on the call. And I have 2 people that would love to ask their question, if it's okay with the audience. They can't really speak, write it. So would it be okay with you all that they speak it, but it'll be at the end? Yeah. 2 minutes only, is that okay with you all? Okay, thank you. Everybody okay with that? So this is the other 2 questions. What are top 3 best arguments for making changes in $7 million? Lawyers to rubber stamp energy rate increases?
What are the top
Top
3
3.
reasons to change to reduce the amount of money we pay the advisors annually? What are the top 3 best arguments
Yes.
to persuade council members to reduce the $7 million annual?
Got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of, there's a lot of good reasons if you want to make a good argument. One of them is that, the way we do things really does make us a laughing stock in terms of utility regulators around the country.
Yes.
People look at the city council and the way they do things, and it's absurd, and everyone knows that. So, I don't know, again, this isn't the main reason we need to change, but if you're arguing to a city council member, it might go after their ego like that. Because, it's true. You talk to people around the country, and people know us, as an example of just this outlier in terms of how things are done. So that might be.
Just to step on that, what we argue in council chambers is that it's about credibility in terms of looking at federal investment, especially when we look at forgiveness for structural protection in the city. And so, as you all know, after Hurricane Katrina, the Army Corps and the federal government invested $14.4 billion in a hurricane risk reduction and storm protection system called HIDRIS. And the state of Louisiana is on the hook for what's called a So if the city council in the way we operate sewage and water board and Entergy, and we allow them to pump groundwater unregulated, if we don't emphasize and prioritize green infrastructure and the greening of our roads and streets and our homes, and we are not reducing our carbon footprint, but instead accelerating it and almost increasing it twofold, then we go to the federal government and we ask them for forgiveness for a poor state, Louisiana, but they say you're not shepherding the funds that we've given you. You're not protecting the assets that you have. I mean, what do you think the federal government is going to say?
The same thing that large national foundations and international foundations say. You're wasting our money and you're flushing it down the drain. Which is why the Rockefeller brothers and others, Bloomberg, and so on, the kinds of organizations that would give philanthropic dollars to help the city of New Orleans be more resilient, more cost-effective, more progressive in terms of dealing with climate change, say, well, what are you doing? We're not going to pour more money into that.
I actually have one more in terms of arguments that you can make. I think something important in this conversation is that nationally and actually globally, the utility business is really changing fast. I mean, me and Logan have talked a lot about this, but we're leaving an era of energy where these kind of utility monopolies, served some purpose. And whether you think they ever had a purpose, but I mean, the point is that energy demand for since electricity became commercially available has been increasing year over year until 2008, and since then it's pretty much been flat. And so without that energy rise, basically the entire business of utilities is changing. So utilities have normally made all of their money by building stuff and then billing their customers an extra interest on those capital costs, right? That's been the business model. So year after year, they were incentivized to build more power plants because there was an expectation that you need more energy every year. That's not happening anymore for a number of reasons, but I think the central one being that people are taking energy efficiency more seriously now. People are reducing, and also appliances are getting, more and more efficient. But the point being, you heard Happy say, we only have one utility provider. I mean, until recently, that was the way it's done, and now you're seeing places starting to open up their energy markets and allow more than just one monopoly utility to compete. So people are actually getting to choose, who they want to buy their energy from, which is a change. So the point being that in the near future, over the next decade, we're going to have to make a lot of changes, and we're going to have to make a lot of decisions. And so the argument would be that we can't really be caught flat-footed at that time. We need to start building in-house knowledge and in-house capacity right now if we want to keep up with the rest of the country and the rest of the world with these changes.
And we don't want to continue to work with the same three old dudes who don't know how to move this stuff forward. I'm sorry to say it that way, but it's just true.
Thank you so much. Is it a next logical step for Justice and Beyond to meet or have come here the mayor's new utility representative, Jonathan Rhodes?
Yeah, that'd be a great idea.
Invite me?
I will. You know I will.
And we should invite the engineer that Curo has hired. And so as you all know, the council selected Jay Banks to be the city council representative on Sewage and Water Board. And part of that resolution was that the city council would hire an engineer to advise him to better understand both water and oil and gas. And so we have one engineer that has been hired through Curo office to advise him on 2 utilities. And so that person is working a lot of hours. We don't know how much they get paid or whatever. But when we invite Jonathan Rhodes in, we need to invite the engineer because I would love to hear from her how, just in handling both of those utilities and advising the council on both of those utilities. I would love that. So we need both of those people to come